Good afternoon. Let me begin this afternoon by once again remembering our neighbors to the northeast and the victims and the families of the victims of the violence in Boston. They are in our thoughts, they are in our prayers. New Yorkers have a special sensitivity for victims of random violence, again, the victims and their families are in our thoughts and prayers. It is another reminder of the new normal, which is constant vigilance. The reminder was not lost on us here in New York. We have increased our police presence and our supervision. New York City certainly, but also all across the state, areas of significance, 9/11 Memorial, et cetera, the Port Authority, the MTA. We put on significant additional personnel and police resources, especially until we know the facts and circumstances about what happened in Boston. But more than anything else, again, to the victims, to the families, they are in our thoughts and prayers. To the elected officials who are dealing with this on the state and local level, we wish them the best. Any help that they need from New York, they've been very good to us in the past. We have a very good mutual relationship with the state, so we've offered assistance on any level, and anything we can do, of course, we will do. With that, we're going to talk about two different topics today. We're going to talk about a public corruption package. We said last week that when we sent up a criminal package of reforms for the legislature to consider. We said that it was the first in a series of initiatives that we would be proposing, because to really get at a comprehensive approach to public corruption is going to involve criminal laws, it's going to involve election reform, it's going to involve campaign finance reform, right? There's many heads to this beast. So we'll be unveiling a comprehensive set of proposals. Last week were the criminal proposals. And Mylan Dennerstein will have another set of reforms that we're going to propose today. Howard is going to speak to us about state and local deductibility of taxes. Probably the greatest economic threat that this state can face is now being posed in Washington when the federal government is talking about eliminating the deductibility of state and local taxes, which would be devastating to this state. It's not the first time that this topic has been raised. It came up once in the Reagan era, but it is really devastating to states like New York, California, and a few others. And Howard will be going through some numbers on that. But let's start with Mylan Dennerstein, and she'll present proposals on public corruption.
Thank you, Governor. Today, we're here to talk about the second set of proposals involving restoring public trust. There are three things the Governor Cuomo is going to propose today. One is an independent enforcement unit at the Board of Elections. Second is eliminate the Wilson-Pakula Act. And third, allow candidates and voters to change their party enrollment in a timely fashion. First, independent enforcement unit at the Board of Elections. The State Board of Elections' ineffective structure leads to gridlock and rarely produces any serious investigations of election law violations. Governor Cuomo's proposal would provide a new independent investigative unit that would supersede the board's inability to enforce and prosecute violations of election law. Under the governor's proposal, the new unit would have the following key features. First, a chief election enforcement council, selected by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. Second, the chief enforcement council would have sole authority over personnel decisions within the unit and would be required to hire based on merit rather than partisanship. Third, the chief election enforcement council would be granted authority to investigate fully and prosecute both civil and criminal cases involving violations of the election laws, with subpoena power and grand jury authority. The State Board of Elections, as you all know, does not currently have authority to prosecute criminal violations, but instead must refer such matters to a district attorney. The new Chief Election Enforcement Counsel would also begin investigations without interference from the Board of Elections and be able to proceed without interference of the Board of Elections, because if the Board of Elections was gridlocked, the case would still proceed. The new unit would also include a substantial investigative staff and attorneys to help investigate and enforce the laws. Second, elimination of the Wilson-Pakula requirement. As many of you know, as a result of the Wilson-Pakula Act of 1947, candidates seeking to run on another party's line in a primary must obtain the permission of the leaders of that party. Sadly, this requirement has led to both actual corruption and the appearance of corruption, as candidates have used the promise of contributions and fundraising efforts to persuade party leaders to grant them such permission. Under Governor Cuomo's proposal today, the Wilson-Pakula requirement would be eliminated, so the candidates would have to collect the signatures from registered members rather than seek the permission of party leaders in order to compete for the nomination of a political party in which they are not enrolled. Again, we're talking about in the primaries. This change would not only lessen the appearance or reality of corruption, but also give voters greater choices in elections to vote for candidates who may not be members of their parties. Finally, allowing candidates and voters to change party enrollment in a timely manner. New York's current party enrollment laws are out of date and out of sync with other states. Currently, if a voter or candidate decides to register with a political party, their registration is not valid until after the next general election, preventing voters from participating in the primaries of the party they wish to join for a full year. The governor's proposal would end this requirement and instead ensure that a voter's party registration would take effect 3 months after the application is received. This proposal would allow voters to have greater flexibility to enroll in a new party or switch parties like many other states. These 3 reforms, together with the other reforms that Governor Cuomo has proposed, would reduce corruption in the nomination process, improve enforcement of our election laws, and give voters much greater opportunities to participate in our elections and choose candidates. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Marlon. This proposal is addressing 2 issues. As you heard, the first is the issue that we came to light once again last week when the indictments were announced about accessing minor parties' nominations. You've heard the expression pay to play. This is pay to run, right? The allegation is that the minor parties basically, on occasion, have used campaign contributions to determine who gets the line. And it's almost that the line goes to the highest bidder. It's one of the issues that's been involved in one of the cases with one of the elected officials who was charged by the U.S. attorney. That is not a new situation. It's not a situation that anyone could say, well, shock and awe. Can you imagine this? It's gone on for many, many years. But let's use this moment to try to fix it once and for all. This situation arises because under the Wilson-Pakula law, it's up to the party leaders to give the designation to who can run for that minor party. And then it's in their discretion, and there has been a suggestion that campaign contributions are used to facilitate that process. Eliminate Wilson-Pakula and make it easier for people to run on for nominations by basically having open primaries for candidates. So a Democrat could run on a minor party line, a Republican could run on a minor party line, and vice versa. Just allow them to run without the approval of the party hierarchy, the party leaders, the party bosses. Second, make it easier for them to enroll. Right now, it takes like a year to affect a change in enrollment. So unless you're really good at advanced planning, it would be too late. 90 days and the enrollment is effective. So you'd facilitate the entrance into the race that way. Second issue has also been a chronic problem, is a lack of enforcement of the Board of Elections. The Board of Elections has been a toothless tiger for a long time. That was pointed to once again by the recent cases. I also believe it provides us with a moment of opportunity for real reform. Let's have an independent enforcement council at the Board of Elections. Board of Elections, by the way, needs reforms above and beyond this, but let's start with this: an independent enforcement council in the Board of Elections, civil authority, criminal authority, and let them do the cases, and we'll keep it out of politics. That is a necessity. I think it's imperative that we get that done this session. And these two reforms, combined with what we talked about last week and other proposals that we will be making, I think takes us well down the road towards really fundamentally changing the system. With that, let me turn it over to Howard Glazer, who will talk to us about state and local deductibility.
Okay. Thank you, Governor. Debate in Washington over the federal deficit has led to a number of proposals on federal tax policy that would have very significant impacts for New York State and for New York State taxpayers. On those proposals, Governor, we prepared a report that's being released today that provides detail on the impact of these. We'll be releasing that to the press shortly. The main one that we're focused on is a proposal that's being discussed now to eliminate the deductibility of state and local, including property taxes, in the federal tax code. Representative Camp, you see in the headline there, is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. He's in the midst of holding about 20 hearings on tax reform. This has become more serious in recent weeks. On March 19th, the chairman held a hearing specifically on state and local deductibility, raising the prospect of eliminating these deductions for New Yorkers and across the nation. Tax Foundation among those testifying that it's a fair thing to do. Others talking about, more bluntly, it's a quick way to pick up $70 billion to take care of the federal deficit. The president's budget also contains caps on deductions, itemized deductions across the board that also have impacts. Those are detailed in this report. Let me just define what is the deduction for state and local taxes. Just very simply, any taxpayer who itemizes their deductions is eligible to deduct taxes they have paid, state income taxes, local income taxes, that affects New York City, Yonkers, as well as property taxes. Quickly, how that works, just give you one quick example, and then we'll show you in a minute what happens when you eliminate this deduction. This is a taxpayer, married, 2 children, earning $200,000 a year. You see that top line is federal adjusted gross income. There's a personal exemption, everybody gets that. No standard deduction because they're itemizing, so that's zero is the third one you see. They're deducting their state personal income tax of $11,000, deducting their city income tax of $6,400, deducting property tax of $3,700. That's $21,400 of, in all, state and local taxes taken off of income and not taxable, resulting in a lower federal taxable income of $162,000, lower than they would have without those deductions. You see the federal tax in this particular example, this is just illustrative, is $33,000. I'm going to show you that in a minute again, but just to give you a sense of it, how widely are those deductions that I just showed you used in New York? Well, basically, 99.9% of all itemizers in New York use those deductions. That's 3.3 million New York State taxpayers. That's twice as many taxpayers as deduct home mortgage interest, 4 times as many take a state and local tax deduction as take a charitable deduction for contributions. Very, very widely used. In the aggregate, it adds up to $57 billion deducted by New Yorkers from their federal taxes when they file. And since everybody just filed basically yesterday, people are very familiar, I think, with this deduction. What happens if you take that deduction away? What are the impacts? There are a lot of impacts. Just talk about the headline impact. That's $15 billion of a tax increase to New York State taxpayers, right? That's the taxable amount that you would have to pay in addition if you no longer have those deductions. Averages for the impacted taxpayers of $4,500 per taxpayer. On the average, a 30% federal tax increase for those taxpayers. The president's proposal also has similar impacts, capping the deductions. What I just talked about was eliminating them. If you cap them under the president's proposal, you still have a $3.8 billion increase in taxes paid by New Yorkers to the federal government. Same example I used before, same couple with 2 children. Remember their tax liability at the bottom, $33,000? You take away the exemption, see all those zeros now in the right, that means their taxable income goes up, their federal tax goes up, it goes up by 8%. This taxpayer paying $2,600 in this example. It's a tax increase of $2,600. It's every income group across the board. If you make under $50,000 in this group and you itemize, it's still an increase. That's 800,000 taxpayers with an average of $700. 50,000 to 100,000 earners, people that earn in that category, almost $2,000 in additional taxes. That's another 1.2 million taxpayers. That's 63% just in those 2 groups alone of all New York taxpayers. This is a chart. I won't spend any time on this. It's in the book that you'll see, but you can see if you look on the right-hand side of the chart all the way down, that's the average increase in tax liability across income groups. It affects every region from Buffalo to Long Island. Those are the increases. You see them as well. So it's not confined to any one region. It's also not just a New York State problem, although in the hearing, one of the things we heard in the hearing in Washington a couple of weeks ago from Ways and Means, the chairman said, and it's often repeated, that California, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, they are the main beneficiaries of this. It's actually not true. 47 million Americans itemize their taxes. Almost every one of them takes some kind of deduction for state or local taxes. New York actually ranks 14th in the percentage of taxpayers that take a deduction for state and local taxes, and areas like Utah, Wisconsin, Virginia, and a dozen others are actually bigger users of this credit than New York is. But it's a significant consequence to New York. Nonetheless, it's not just to the individual taxpayer. You're taking $15 billion of income out of people's pockets. That means out of the economy. The impact of that is on jobs, it's on the gross state product, it's on gross economic activity, and it's actually a decrease of personal income all the way around. So there's significant economic consequences, significant consequences to individuals. That's a general summary of where this is now. We're tracking these proposals very carefully. You'll see statements from the congressional delegation today in our press release, as well as from many groups around the state. Again, the report contains many details on this, Governor, and we'll be continuing to work with our partners in Washington on this in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you. It would be a devastating economic blow to the state. You know how we worked very hard to change the reality and the perception of New York as the tax capital and bring taxes actually down. This would reverse it in one stroke of a pen by eliminating the deductibility. It affects, as you heard in the numbers, it affects close to 40% of the taxpayers in this state. It's all across the state. It's all across the income spectrum. About 800,000 people under $50,000 in income. So it's all across the income spectrum. As I said, I understand the political benefit of it because it raises a lot of money, roughly $70 billion, from just a relative handful of states. But it's unconscionable as a policy and as a tactic. Questions?
Governor, you had said that campaign finance reform needs to be part of this overall reform package. Do you feel as though in order to really work, it has to target these so-called housekeeping accounts?
I think it has to do a lot more than that, Zach. I think we need comprehensive campaign finance. We've been working on a campaign finance overhaul with public finance in it. We've been working with both houses. We don't have an agreed-to package at this point. We have more time on the clock, but we don't have an agreement. But I think campaign finance is a vital part of this. Again, it's not people look for a silver bullet. There is no silver bullet here because there's many issues that we're dealing with, not just in the recent cases, but you look back at the cases that I did as Attorney General. I mean, there's a whole system that you're policing, right? And you're trying to put in preventive measures built into the system to try to prevent fraud and corruption from happening in the first place. That's why I think what we're trying to lay out is you need criminal laws, which obviously are the punishment and hopefully a deterrent. Then you need design changes in the political system. like what we're talking about today, which is Wilson Pakula, you're forcing people to go to the party bosses to get access to the ballot. Lo and behold, party bosses have said, well, make a contribution and I'll get you on the ballot. Well, that was predictable, but Wilson Pakula's been in the law for a long time. Get rid of Wilson Pakula, let people run. So I think there is no silver bullet. Campaign finance, public finance, part of it, but only part of it.
Why are you retreating from your campaign promise to give the AG concurrent jurisdiction on these election violations?
I'm not, Jimmy. I think the optimum solution is to have an independent enforcement mechanism in the Board of Elections. That is the best way to do this. And I think the time is now, and I'm looking forward to working with both houses to get that done by the end of this session. As a fallback, one of the fallbacks could be using the Attorney General's office to do the enforcement. You know, there is a Deputy Attorney General now for Medicaid fraud, which was set up by executive order. And it's been, first one was Joe Hines, it's done extraordinarily well. So you could use the Attorney General's office to do this. I believe the optimum is an independent, non-political enforcement mechanism in the Board of Elections. But one way or the other, we have to get it done by the end of this session.
Why is that optimum? Why is that more preferable than having the AG just do it? And the second one is, are you asserting that you believe the governor and executive, can give OAG the power to have jurisdiction over election law by fiat rather than by legislation?
My position is that I could do it by executive order. It is the optimum is to do it by legislation, funded in the Board of Elections and independent. You don't want anyone, you know, there's a flip side to this whole conversation, is you want to make sure you don't politicize enforcement around elections. And you can see the fear there. So the independence and the non-political nature of the enforcement mechanism is important. Many people have raised the point that partisan officials, elected officials, it's better to have an independent, non-partisan official. I believe that's the optimum, and I believe we could come up with a mechanism that does that in the Board of Elections. But at one point, if you can't get the best solution, get a functional solution. And I think what's most important is that we have an enforcement mechanism at the Board of Elections. Let's try to work it through and do the best we can. But by the end of this session, I want to have an enforcement mechanism one way or the other.
Won't the fact that you appoint them taint it? Doesn't that make it political?
It can be confirmed by the Senate. You know, you want, well, let them have another screening mechanism. Let them propose a screening mechanism if they want, but I believe I can find an independent person. I think I can achieve that. If they don't think they're independent, they don't confirm them, Jimmy. That's simple. Don't confirm a person who you don't believe is independent.
Did you give any thought to eliminating cross-endorsements by minor parties? That's been talked about. You've raised the issue in the past.
That is an option also. I think this is a better option, but that's an option.
Why didn't you go with that option?
That would be eliminating minor parties, right? That is a de facto elimination of the minor parties.
Well, they would just have different candidates.
Well, but they'd have to get enough votes to survive in a gubernatorial election, which would be hard if you didn't have a person who people thought had a viable chance to win.
But New York is the only state, I believe, or one of the only states that allows cross-endorsements by minor parties.
Yeah, no, many people have that position, Ken. I think this is a better outcome. But look, it's, again, like on the Board of Elections, there's a range of options. There's sort of an optimum, and then there's a descending array of options that are less perfect. I think this would be the best. You have minor parties. They play a role. They can play an important role in the electoral process, but you have to stop the pay to run. You have to make them accessible. If you couldn't do that, could you get to a situation where you say, well, I think the burden of them outweighs the benefit? Yes. I'm not there yet, but I think you can reform the system.
Do you think politically you would not have been able to get that through since, for instance, the working families has close ties to the Democrats, the Conservative Party, close ties to the Republicans?
This is all politically difficult. Okay? This is all very politically difficult. So we're talking about degrees of difficulty. I think eliminating no cross endorsements is de facto seen as eliminating the minor parties. I think eliminating the minor parties, which I do not support, would be politically very, very difficult, if not impossible.
You could lower the threshold from 50,000 votes in the gubernatorial election, right?
You could, or you could raise the threshold. You could do whatever you'd want.
But I mean, to keep minor parties viable and let them run their own candidates, you could say you only need to get 10,000 votes for 5,000, and you're still a bona fide party, right?
Yeah, but then if you're one of the major parties, then you see the minor party as just siphoning off votes from you.
Governor, have you spoken at all to the leadership of the Independence Party or the Working Families Party? I don't expect you to talk to Mike Long about this necessarily, but have you spoken to the Working Families Party? Did they ask you not to go after Wilson Pakula?
I know that they do not support these proposals.
And are you worried that that's going to hurt your relationship moving forward with them? Presumably, you're going to be seeking that line in 2014.
You know, Nick, you make proposals. Many of the proposals I make offend people. You know, you can't just make proposals that keep people happy. There'd be very few proposals in this business at this time.
On that point, would you be willing to swear off of running on a party line if it's not through an open primary in 2016?
I'm not going. I will live with the rules, Casey, of the system that are in place. You know, the question, well, will you live by another set of rules? Will you handicap yourself? I don't think that's a fair question to ask a person. Live within the rules, try the best you can to change the rules, but then I'll live within the rules.
With all the proposals that are out there, the IDC, Senate Democrats, Assembly Democrats, yours, what's the likelihood a lot of what you want gets done in a final bill, and how much compromise will there be?
I believe we have a moment of opportunity, and as we've discussed in this room many times, you know, you seize the moment of opportunity for change because people are leading their life, and once in a while people happen to focus on this thing called government and happen to focus on this thing called politics and social policy, and when they focus is a good time to explain the facts and for action. I believe we have a moment of opportunity. I believe the newspaper headlines last week created a moment of opportunity. So we're putting forth a comprehensive set of proposals that, frankly, I would have said at a different time had no chance whatsoever of passing. But I believe now, given the environment, they have a chance of passing. I'm not underestimating the political difficulty of these things because it is a system that has been put in place over a very long period of time, and it's an intricate system, and it's a system that works for the political powers that be. So it is complicated, and it is hard to unravel. But I think, yes, I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to come up with a package that brings reform.
Have you had conversations with the leaders?
Yes.
And how have those conversations gone?
Swimmingly.
What you said repeatedly about acting in the moment, are you saying that you want to act on something in the coming days, the coming weeks, rather than by the end of the session?
Session, John.
So you think the moment lasts till the end of the session?
We're going to stretch this moment to hold on to this moment as long as we can. This special moment.
Governor, are you going to release bill language on these proposals, or do you expect that to come when a deal is inevitable?
I will give you a hint. Normally, when we release bill language before an agreement, it means the probability of that bill passing is very, very low. Bill language, to put forth specifics when you don't have an agreement, in my experience, polarizes the parties. It makes it harder to come to agreement because you've pushed people to their respective corners. And I found that counterproductive. If your goal is actually to reach a consensus and to reach an agreement, by definition, which means every person has to feel that they were part of the solution and part of the win, when you start quantifying and polarizing, it works against that. Sometimes, depending on the specifics, sometimes we can put out a bill and not prejudice our ability to actually get an agreement. But that's just for you, for your future reference. Just remember that.
Isn't that a break from, the basics of our legislative process?
Well, we put out the intended goals and desires.
Right, supporting documents or statements, but people say that they can't judge your proposals unless they see the specifics.
They can judge the proposals. I'm not going to make you say 4 and me say 6, so that now it's hard for each of us to move because you said 4 and I said 6.
Governor, to go back to the Attorney General question, you said in your campaign that you wanted both to grant jurisdiction to the AG and to do independent enforcement at the Board of Elections, those two things together. Why are you not proposing both of those things now?
I have to look, Tom. I think if you have, let me look at the book. They sound redundant to me. If you have an effective enforcement mechanism at the Board of Elections, that would be it. But let me look at what the book said.
Governor, what would happen if the Senate doesn't confirm your nominee this session?
I'd find another nominee.
Is that where the AG's office would come in?
Well, assuming it was in good faith. Look, the opposing party has a legitimate interest in making sure I don't pick a partisan Democrat. That's what they're trying to say. They're trying to say it nicely, but they're trying to say, I don't want a partisan doing the quote-unquote independent enforcement because maybe a Democrat will play politics. That's a legitimate concern that they would have. My solution is I'll pick, you confirm. If the person is not independent, don't confirm the person. And I'll find another candidate. Now, if this went on, if this was not bona fide and this was not in good faith and it was just a ruse and everyone I found, they said, well, that person is no good, well, then obviously at one point you'd say, this is not productive. But that hasn't been my experience with them. And again, it is a legitimate concern. Politics can be a dirty, rough sport. I know that firsthand. And if somebody's a prosecutor and is political or gets caught up in a political moment, so I get the concern. I really get the concern. So it should be independent. I get it. But more than anything at this point, it has to exist also.
Do you have anyone in line for that job?
No, Nick. Are you interested?
Are there enough good ideas out there for campaign finance reform, for anti-corruption, that you wouldn't have to necessarily get public financing of campaigns? Is there a package in this moment and all that can be good enough without that for you?
I want public financing.
So the question is, could you possibly get all of these good ideas together, excluding public financing, and still be something you could back?
I would miss public financing.
So you wouldn't approve that?
Well, would I veto it?
Would you not support a bill that doesn't have?
I would say these could be good things, but we need public financing.
So you wouldn't sign on to that? You wouldn't participate?
I think we need public financing. I think we need the criminal proposals I proposed last week. I think we need to eliminate Wilson Pakula. I think we need to make the reforms, with the rest of the reforms we announced today. I think we need an independent enforcement agent in the Board of Elections. I think we need the proposals that will be coming in the next few weeks. If those proposals do not become law, I will say to you, I wish those proposals had become law.
So it sounds like you'd be open to it. If you got 98% of what you wanted, public financing wasn't in there, you could support it and say you wished it had been in there.
Well, it's always the way, you know, there are always laws that I wish were passed that aren't passed. I don't think there has been a perfect legislative session for me, but I continue to strive.
Governor, in the past, we're trying to pick people to do politically sensitive tasks. I'm specifically thinking about your concept on redistricting reform, which I just realized was a bill that you put out early as a program bill. You advocated for the creation of sort of intermediaries that would pick the people or pick the person for that job. Why is that not appropriate in selecting?
You can get very complicated cases. Some mechanisms have you pick a panel, and the panel picks a panel, and that panel picks another panel. Yeah, you can do it ad infinitum. Or, here's a person, if you don't like them, don't confirm them, I'll get another person.
Governor, how long would that person serve in office?
I don't think, we set a term, I don't think we set the length of the term, Tom.
Serve the pleasure of that person?
No, term. Would be a term.
Do you, on the federal proposal here, what are you planning to do other than raise the issue? Are you planning to go to DC? What's your plan?
We need to, I went through this once before in my life, during the Reagan administration. My father was governor, and this came up. It is a technical topic, so it is hard to communicate. And as soon as you say state and local tax deductibility, people's eyes glaze over. And because it's complicated, that makes it dangerous from my point of view. Because it's significant money for Washington at a time when they desperately need money. It affects a relatively small handful of states, so the political calculus for them is going to make this very attractive. It would be, as I said before, devastating to this state. And we're working with the congressional delegation on this. I've spoken with many of them myself. I want to educate the people in this state. I want to make sure the legislators in Washington know the kind of impact this would have. We're speaking to other states.
Advocates for medical marijuana in the press conference today, they said that for the first time, the bill that they're looking at has a good chance of passing the Senate, not just the Assembly. Assuming it does pass the Senate, is that something you could support?
Is this to follow on to Mike's question? Could I support medical marijuana? No.
Not in the new form, not in any way.
I haven't seen the new form, but I do not support medical marijuana. I understand the pros and cons. I understand the argument. We are looking at it, but at this point, I don't support medical marijuana.
What about the argument some have made, though, that you want to, and I know you say it's a stop and frisk issue, but you want to decriminalize possession of small amounts of pot, but then in this case, you won't legalize, pot for people who may be suffering?
Can't, it's apples and oranges. First of all, as you said, it's the stop and frisk issue. It's not a marijuana issue on the first case, right? It's an injustice that is perpetuated through the stop and frisk procedure. And we're trying to fix that problem, which I believe is a civil rights violation. That's what we're trying to do it's not about decriminalizing marijuana, it's about protecting the rights of innocent people through the stop and frisk procedure. Second, medical marijuana, they're not talking about small quantities of marijuana that we're talking about decriminalizing in stop and frisk.
Is this a shift for you, though, Governor? I mean, last year, if I recall correctly, you said you were open to this.
I said we were looking at it.
And so now you're
But
saying...
I do not support it at this time. We're looking at it. And I have opposed it in the past.
The New York State Pistol and Rifle Association.
Excuse me one second. If you could find out, Eric, if you had a system where you could say, I understand the benefits, it's the risks, and how do you construct a system that really is that tightly controlled that you don't have dissemination beyond the directed population? I'm sorry.
The New York State Pistol and Rifle Association filed a request for an injunction today for the implementation of portions of the SAFE Act that pertain to the size of the magazines and restrictions on stocks and grips. Do you have any comment on
Nope.
that?
Do you support eliminating a tax break, a property tax break that's been on the books since 1982 for Madison Square Garden? It's a state law that has put it in perpetuity, but it's a city
Do I support?
Revoking the tax break from Madison Square Garden.
No. Is that the right answer, Bob? Yes. Yes.
Why
Is
not?
yes or no the right answer?
Why not? Well, hold on, why not?
There's no reason.
No reason.
No reason to, what's the reason for the elimination?
They say it's 16 million that could go to fill the city coffers.
I haven't heard any argument that is convincing to eliminate it. Let me put it that way. Betty?
You apparently have raised about $22 million in your campaign funds. What happens to that $22 million when you go for public finance?
I get to keep it personally and retire and stay on the beach for the rest of my life. Much fishing in parts all over the state of New York.
Actually, what does happen to that?
I don't know that we've contemplated it.
The Democratic State Committee is now airing ads in support of the budget, in support of some federal policy areas. But I believe that they'd be able to raise unlimited contributions because they can claim their housekeeping ads. Is that the kind of activity that you'd support?
I support limits on housekeeping.
You support limits? What kinds of limits?
Financial. As opposed to what, moral?
Are you aware of the state party's activities? You are the highest ranked
Yes.
Democrat in the state.
Yes.
Do you feel it's appropriate that they're using what many describe as a loophole to air these ads?
It's not a loophole, it's the law.
Praised for your political acumen.
Oh, have you praised me for my political acumen, Kim?
Praised,
By whom?
New York Magazine.
I didn't consider that praise. And I did not like that picture, I'll tell you the truth.
What do you think about Anthony Weiner getting into the mayor's race?
I have no comment on that. This press conference is over, thank you very much.